Honors College. Um, and I want to welcome the Friends of the Academy of Natural Sciences and of the Pannoni Honors College today. This partnership, Pannoni, with the Academy, and I'm so pleased to explore important and often controversial topics in an honest but civil manner. We've explored in the past, we've had dozens of these panels. We've explored such topics as free speech on the college campus, prison reform, the pros and cons of gentrification, and the two-party system, among others. We will be having another panel at Drexel in McAllister Hall on November 7th at 3:30 on the subject of identity politics. So you're all welcome to come to that, and you can look on our website and for other announcements through Drexel for that. We owe a great deal of, we owe a great debt to our team at Pannoni, led by Erica Zellinger, who's here somewhere, head of marketing and media, and others in the Academy as well as at Drexel who have helped put this event together. I should also say that these panels are part of a larger initiative that we are launching at Pannoni, at the Pannoni Honors College, called the Center for Civil Discourse, with the notion that we present topics that are important and controversial, and we try and talk across difference about them. I should also note, for those that are interested in this sort of thing, that tomorrow and every Wednesday throughout the term, we are also hosting a discussion-based event at the Klein Institute for Trial Advocacy on 12th and Chestnut. Some of you may have been there. If you haven't, it's worth a visit. It's a very unusual space. And we're holding a discussion every Wednesday on some topical subject in the news or in the air. And this Wednesday, our topic will be the policies of Larry Krasner, our district attorney. So if you're interested in that, just show up at 12th and Chestnut and be prepared to engage. So without further ado, I want to begin this event, and I will introduce our moderator, Jen Ayers. Jen Ayers has been a visiting fellow in our series in the Pannoni Honors College called the Symposium. These are theme-based courses that deal with subjects in the area of expertise of our fellow. During the first year, Jen taught courses on the topic of fashion, fashion and material culture, fashion in the city, fashion and sustainability, and fashion and oral history. By the way, she is an instructor at Parsons. I always get Fashion Institute and Parsons a bit confused, but Parsons Institute, Fashion Institute in New York City. In keeping with our panel tonight, she's teaching this year's symposium on the topic of waste, from waste in the built environment to waste in design and waste in climate change. She brings over 15 years' experience in the vintage clothing industry as seller, collector, and researcher, living, breathing, teaching, and researching about the commodity chain of secondhand clothes and what it tells us about consumption, exchange, and value. The subject that I think is fascinating and that's going to be explored along with other subjects connected with waste on this panel today. So, Jen, thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining me tonight and joining us all tonight. Can you hear me okay? Back there? Okay, all right. So I'd like to introduce our panelists here today. First, we have Jonathan Deutsch to my right. He is a professor in the Department of Food and Hospitality Management at Drexel, and he was the James Beard Foundation Impact Fellow leading a national curriculum on food waste. He runs the Drexel Food Lab, which is a culinary institution and food product research development lab. And then he has also been the author and editor of over 8 books. So he is our guide tonight that is talking about food that's been trained as a chef. And fun fact about Jonathan is that Dean Cohen was actually his freshman English teacher in 1997. All right. Next up, we have Ron White. Ron White is a environmental activist and runs an alternative media resource inspired by the deep ecology movement. This alternative media resource is called Deep Green Philly. Deep Green Philly on. All right, cool. Deep Green Philly on Facebook. And I actually found out about it because Ron runs something called the Trash Academy that's partnered with the Mural Arts Philadelphia's Restored Spaces Initiative, and he helped design this pamphlet that I found on Drexel campus. And this pamphlet is called We Have the Right to a Clean City. And so that's when I learned about Ron's work and the Deep Green Philly Facebook page, and hopefully he'll be talking to us more tonight about his work at the Trash Academy. He also enjoys dressing up as the plastic bag monster for outreach events with the Trash Academy in Philly. And so next up, I have Marie Kurtz. She is our water person. She studies freshwater water systems and is an assistant research professor in the Department of Biodiversity, Earth, and Environmental Sciences. To the panel, she offers the perspective of environment contamination, so how we use of and dispose industrial and consumer products like car oil down the drain. She's really interested in that. And prior to Drexel, she worked as a research scientist in Germany, where they take household recycling and trash as an art form, and they sort and recycle trash into 7 different bins. So on our panel so far, we have a food waste person, environmental activist in Philadelphia, and a water person. And last up is our representative from Philly's streets department. We have Kyle Lewis. Kyle Lewis is the recycling director, and she has personally helped distribute over 80,000 pounds of used clothing throughout the tri-state region, schlepping countless bags with awesome volunteers and staff. And she also brings to this panel 30 years of experience in plant and event operations with sustainability in mind and practice. So without further ado, please help me welcome our panelists to the stage. So first off, I'd like to say a little bit about the title of our panel tonight. So our title is called Wasted Efforts, and I wanted to quickly explain that this was our thinking that there might be less coordination than is needed to tackle the scale and the enormity of the problem of waste, right? And to this, I specifically am referencing a book called Recycling Reconsidered by Samantha McBride. And in this book, Samantha McBride, someone who has had years of experience as a sanitation director, scientist, she's basically saying that we need to coordinate efforts. And coordination of efforts, tackling waste, tackling recycling, needs infrastructure and it needs investment. So today in this panel, we're not going to be talking so much about individual efforts to shame consumers out of their plastic bottles or straws, right? We're going to try and talk about the larger scale of how do we tackle, an enormous issue quite literally. So on that note, I'd like to start just with a general first question about what do you think the biggest issues are in terms of waste within your industry and field? And I'd like to have that question for each of our panelists respond.
I could probably just talk loud enough, but I won't. Okay, I think it's there. All right, thank you. I certainly think the biggest issue in solid waste is just the amount, and the fact that over the past 5 years, we've seen the amount of waste in Philadelphia increase significantly to where each resident is responsible for about a ton of waste a year. And so, and we in the sanitation world speak in tonnage, right? So that's 2,000 pounds. I know you all know that, But it sounds a lot more impactful when we talk about it in terms of pounds, and when we're looking at it in terms of like the size of a small sedan. That's how much waste each individual generates. And so on the solid waste end, it's certainly the just the mass consumerism leading to massive amounts of waste, and the ever increasing, unfortunately, amounts of waste that people are generating. With regard to contamination, with regard to recycling, see how much it's on my mind. The number one problem in recycling is certainly contamination. We are, our effort and our goal in the world of recycling is to recycle the materials that we can to the highest extent possible, so that there's the most environmental benefit from it. And when people are what we call wish cycling, putting things in the bin that don't belong there, putting things that they want to be recyclable in the recycling bin, it doesn't really help the effort. It is essentially putting trash in the recycling stream, and that has led to significant changes in the world of recycling. You all, I'm sure you know about China's ban and reduction of their contamination standard to 0.5%. Most other countries who accept recycling have also now reduced that standard to 0.5%. And so the level of contamination has to come down in order for recycling to be most economically viable and most environmentally viable. And so I would say that those are the two largest, or the largest issues in the world of waste and recycling.
Let me jump in really quick and say that recycling basically is a market operation, so there has to be markets out there to take the recycling. So the problem of wish cycling is wishing that a plastic container is recyclable and throwing that in its proper bin, but actually it depends on if the infrastructure exists in that city to handle it there, or it's basically shipped overseas and burned or melted down in some way. So trade policy actually has a huge role to play in recycling, which is something I don't think we initially think about when we're like, is it a plastic? Is it a metal? Is it glass? So that's a huge constraint on the ability to do your job as well, Kyle. That countries not wanting there to be dumped on with plastic products really actually puts the onus back on producers, back on consumers in America to find a solution to waste instead of just displacing it elsewhere.
Absolutely. The circular economy is something that more and more people are talking about, and frankly is what we need, right? We need to be able to have outlets domestically, preferably, for this waste, and to be able to turn around into marketable products. There is one of the things, there's that old saying of out of chaos, what is it? Out of confusion comes opportunity, something like that. Comes when there are these challenging times, the opportunity now has presented itself such that there are these emerging markets and building the circular economy, and so I think that that's fantastic. We're not going to see that probably for the next 2 at the short end, more like 3, 4, 5 years. We're not going to see that really emerge as a significant taker of the world's recycling. And so until then and beyond, we have to work with these overseas markets. We have to certainly invest in domestic markets, and as there are more factories coming online and paper factories coming back up online in Indiana and things like that, we are doing that and making sure that we invest in the circular economy is really going to be one of the ways that we get to zero waste.
All right. So as Jen introduced to some degree, I come at this from the perspective of contamination in the environment, and as a chemist, particularly that to me means chemical contamination. And these is essentially the result of improper disposal of waste, be it industrial waste, from industrial processes, be it the waste that we have in our household that we don't always dispose of. So for example, right, dumping oil, your used car oil down the storm drain or dumping it in the lawn, it gets into our water eventually. When you flush pharmaceuticals down the toilet, that also goes into our wastewater treatment system and generally flows right through and into our rivers. And so these sort of improper disposal of waste, and it's not always even just a recycling issue, it's just needing better places to put that waste and having the information out there of where it can go. But it's not just a consumer issue. There's also a huge, as I mentioned, industrial issue of how we use chemicals and the sort of, I won't say flippancy, but lack of regard in how we dispose of these chemicals. And they get out into the environment through a myriad different processes, different pathways. And so it's not a one-stop-all solution. We really have to reconsider what's our priority in using these chemicals. Is it worth the risk of them getting in the environment? And then that leads not just to the sort of ethical, okay, it's in the environment, but there's massive human health concerns associated with chemicals in the environment. So it all comes back to us eventually, both as the cause and ultimately as one of the parties that most suffers for it. And so that's sort of my perspective on the big issue of waste in my field.
Oh, here we go.
All right.
So at Mural Arts, Trash Academy began as a series of community discussions. We went to South Philly and we asked people, what are the biggest issues facing your community? And time again, we heard the trash, the litter, the dumping. Certain communities are just inundated with trash because they live in low-income neighborhoods or they live in corridors that have a lot of businesses. Many businesses in Philadelphia are not paying what they should to get their trash properly disposed of, so they're just dumping it in certain communities. So it's also an environmental justice issue. We realize there are all of these interlocking things going on, but the main issue for us is how do we message this to the public? And the fact that there are so many other competing things out there grabbing people's attention, right? So how do we use art to amplify an environmental justice message? That is something that we constantly grapple with because as you know, if you turn on the TV or go on the internet, you can see advertisements everywhere trying to get your attention. There's so much media out there as far as music, as far as all sorts of things. So how do you actually use art to grab people's attention? I think right now it's becoming easier because of the climate strikes, because of the fact that young people are realizing that we're facing a very dire situation regarding our environment. So now we see an opening, right? And that's why we started to use billboards as a way to reach the public. And I know that we're not going to focus too much tonight on personal behavior, but I have to say that we have to start there as far as Trash Academy is concerned, because we're doing a plastic bag campaign. And we want to educate people about why plastic bags are harmful to the environment and why we need to get rid of them. And we do want to have that conversation about our economic system and about how the systemic issues need to be addressed. But in order to actually start the conversation, we have to start it from where people are. And people are in their homes, they're at the store, they're in their car, where they may have a reusable bag, but they maybe forgot it at home or something. So we have to actually start at the point where people can most easily be targeted, and we do see that sometimes can be the personal consumption angle. So for us, like trying to get that message across, that for us is the most important challenge right now.
Great. Thanks so much.
I'm glad to go last because I feel like the food industry often is at the hub of all these issues, right? Neighborhood waste, vermin, a lot of the condition of things is because of retail, restaurants, delis, corner stores, things like that. Water. The food industry is huge. Actually, agriculture is the largest industry for water use and one of the big culprits in contamination. And then recycling, food packaging, either producing it or using it, right? So a lot of things converge in the kitchen, which my students here we talk about a lot. So the food and agriculture in general are just tremendous wasters and consumers, and for very good reason. You know, if we weren't big consumers and big producers, we wouldn't be here, as opposed to some other sectors where you could say, well, we could trim this out of our lives. It's sort of a luxury item. You really can't do that with food. But that said, we're really not doing a very efficient job of it. So the best estimates are between 1/3 and 40% of food is lost or wasted. About $1,200 a year per household goes to purchase food that's never eaten. And just is, so, you know, if you're more efficient, you can all just give yourself a $1,000 raise just by being better consumers. So that, you know, there's a lot of problems in our system, but I think Jen's question was the two biggest. So I think one is a really cultural shift. We have this culture of abundance, right? If you're thinking, as I am, about what I'm gonna grab for dinner after this, my first question is, what do I want, right? I can get pizza, I can get tacos, I can get anything I want. We are in a great city. We're never talking about what's the most responsible. We don't start with what's the most responsible. We don't start with what's in my fridge that I can have first, when I get home. We're thinking, what do I want? And you see that in the store, right? There's huge abundant displays of everything. And if you walked into a store, and as happened when Amazon took over Whole Foods, and you see one can left on the shelf, you know, you're instantly complaining that there's some sort of defect. You were conditioned to want this abundance. So I think that's the first problem. Another problem is just kind of really obfuscated, messy regulation. So if anyone can tell me the difference between best by, use by, sell by, best before, they're all voluntary, established by the manufacturer. There's only one product that has a real use by date that's regulated by the FDA. Does anyone know what it is? No. Infant formula is the only one.
All right.
Thank you. Everything else is just totally sort of a free-for-all. And so we're actually being told by marketers to throw out food that they want us to think is too old, so that we go out and buy more. So it's really a very messy and broken system.
Thanks so much for that. This is all fascinating info. I would like us to zoom out even just a little bit further in talking about how Philly, as a city, this environment, fits into the national and the global scale in terms of waste. And anyone can answer that question first.
You want me? Okay. So how Philly fits into that is Philly is actually below the average in the amount of waste that we produce per capita. Is a ton good though? No, right? Where the average stat that I recently read was like 2,400 pounds per person in the United States. Philly's, in terms of contamination rate, we're pretty spot on. We were averaging around 15 to 20%, and now we're up to about 22 to 24%, and the national average was 25%. Again, it's difficult to say that we're doing better when better is not where we want to be, right? We want to be, we appreciate that we're doing better, but where we really want to be is reducing the amount of, or encouraging our residents and commercial businesses and all that come into Philadelphia to reduce the amount of waste that they produce in a day. I do a lot of workshops with people, and I ask, one of the questions that I sometimes open with is, how many things did you throw away today? Right? And the reality is that most of us can't count it because it's such an automatic rote thing that we do, and we're not really paying attention to how much stuff we generate in a day, and how much stuff we buy, how much stuff we utilize, and how much stuff we therefore throw away. One thing that I always encourage people to do, and it relates to Ron and the plastic bag campaign, or it relates to the current plastic bag campaign going on and the discussions around it, is when you go into a store, generally the clerk or the person behind the counter is automatically going to put your stuff in a bag, whether it's one item, whether it's 5 items, or whether it's 10 items. They're automatic, right? Because that's their job, is to just put it in a bag. And so I encourage people to really consider, do you need a bag? If I go into the store and I buy a tube of deodorant, do I need a bag? I can just put that in my purse. God knows it's overloaded, but so what? You know, I can just keep it in my hand until I get to the car if that's where I'm going. And so we have to, I like what Jonathan said about the culture of abundance, not that that's what we want to be, but that is where we are, and we have to, as Ron said, meet people where they are to get them to where we need to bring them. And so I think pointing out to people, giving a level of awareness around what they're doing and getting them to be a little bit more mindful about it is important. You know, in terms of Philly on a national scale, we as a country and as a world, if we don't do better, we're all going to be in a difficult position. And so though we are doing better in Philadelphia, there's still a lot more work to be done.
Thank
I don't want to lose my thought, so. I appreciate what Kyle just said about the plastic bag issue, because I'm going to bring it up again and again because this campaign is going on, and I want you all to think about it and hopefully take it with you. So Philly goes through almost 1 billion plastic bags a year, right? So that's a lot of plastic bags. But when we talk about litter and dumping and the trash issue in general, the way we look at it at Trash Academy is that it's an environmental justice issue. And I'm sure most of you are at least generally familiar with environmental justice and how it's different from environmentalism. Most people, when they think about environmentalism, they think about polar bears or ice caps and rainforest. And not like that's not important. Of course, that is important. But when we talk about environmental justice, we're talking about how policies and institutions are affecting people of color disproportionately, as opposed to how other people are, living. Some people are not living near dumps. Some people are not living near highways, right? If you live in the suburbs, your neighborhood is probably not dirty and filled with garbage and trash. So that's what we're dealing with here in Philly. The fact that many low-income people are living in very littered and dirty neighborhoods, and they're complaining about it. It's not being addressed. So what we're doing at Mural Arts and Trash Academy is we're trying to use art and creativity as a way to spread the message of, hey, these communities deserve some kind of attention as well. We should have cleanups, not just in Center City, we should have cleanups all over the city. We should pay people to go and clean up trash. We should address the source of the trash. There's also the issue of the fact that it's a public health issue. It's a public health issue. There were some studies done at Penn recently that said that if you live near a dirty, trashy, vacant lot, that affects your mental health. It affects the crime in the neighborhood. There's a lot of things connected with trash and litter that we don't normally think of, like the fact that people hide guns in vacant lots filled with trash for some reason. I had never heard of that before, but that's something that people do because, I mean, it doesn't even, who would think of that? But because it's a vacant lot, first of all, because it's dirty, it's a perfect place to just hide things, hide drugs, hide guns, people do that. And it creates a sense of fear, it creates a sense of displacement in the community. People don't want to go out and be in their own community because it's so dirty and because it's so trashy. And they begin to internalize that feeling of maybe I'm dirty, maybe I'm trashy because I live in this kind of neighborhood. So it really is a lot of different levels to this. And I think that in Philly, that's one of the main issues, is this environmental justice issue of who is living near trash and who does not live near trash.
I'd like to go next because I want to build on what both Kyle and Ron said, and it's a great lesson in research, I think, and not being too quantitative about it. So in food as well as in other things, Philly looks a little bit better on paper, right? We're throwing out less. That sounds good until you realize the reason is because we don't have as much, right? We have rampant poverty in the city. We're a poor city. So it sounds, on the surface, it sounds really great that we're disposing of less than, the typical American, but it's because as a city we have less because we have less income. And in food, especially where that's manifest, is if you don't have, the most wasted things are fresh fish, fresh meat, fresh produce, right? Healthy, wholesome foods are the ones that go bad, right? A bag of rice, a bag of chips, a can of soda don't go bad. They'll hang out in the fridge. So yes, we're not wasting them, but in some cases, it's sort of disguising the problem that the numbers are a little bit rosier here than they might be for other cities.
A little easier this way, yeah. So I'll piggyback off food and say what we drink is the issue that comes to mind most to us. So Philadelphia gets all of its drinking water from the Delaware or the Schuylkill rivers, and we are at the very downstream end of those rivers. They start up in New York, up in northern Pennsylvania, which means all of the waste, the chemical waste, the physical waste, the plastic bags as they break down into microplastics, all of that flows down to Philadelphia, and then we take our drinking water out of that somewhat contaminated rivers. And you might think, oh, it's okay, we clean it. Well, drinking water treatment doesn't remove all those contaminants. Pharmaceuticals can pass right through. Industrial contaminants can pass right through, as can microplastics. As they break down small enough, they get through the physical filters. And so to me, it's that the problem is a Philadelphia problem, and if you drink water from the city and don't think that bottled water is much better necessarily, often it comes from municipal water sources. So if you're drinking that water, which I hope you all do, then this is an issue, and it's not one that we can solve necessarily as a city because we're at that downstream sort of receiving end. And so it has to be a larger conversation, I think, often than just Philadelphia as well.
Great, thanks so much, guys. I would like now to ask you, the what can we do question. If whoever would like to take that question first.
Okay. So Kyle said something about mindfulness and in terms of disposal. In the food world, we talk a lot about mindful eating, right? Being very conscious of what you're putting in the body as opposed to mindless eating, right? Just sitting down in front of the TV, sort of snacking on whatever's in front of you. And we've been, with our students, preaching the idea of mindful cooking in sort of the same way, and I think that's a really good thing to do at home. I gave an example earlier about, deciding on what to eat. Shockingly few people take inventory of what they have before deciding what to add to either to their bodies or to their households in terms of additional food that generates additional waste, right? So things like taking inventory of what you have and cooking from that. Learning to cook in general, right, is going to reduce packaging, it's going to reduce expense, and is generally more sustainable. And then looking at the food you have and thinking, what can I do with this? It's really amazing. And one of the first things I did when I was chefing was always to get rid of the giant 50-gallon or 40-gallon trash can right next to the prep station, move that outside of the kitchen, and replace it with a what's called a hotel pan, just a wide open pan, sometimes even a plastic see-through one. And the shame of seeing perfectly beautiful food that with a little bit more skill or a little bit more attention could be used, dramatically and instantly reduces the food cost of any restaurant, and so it works every time. And I shame my students in classes sometimes too for the same reason.
So as I mentioned a few times already, we have this plastic bag campaign. Sorry, I have to keep mentioning it because we have to make it happen, hopefully. And so we realize that like there's this dialectical relationship between consumerism and the corporate end. So of course corporations are manufacturing these goods, but people are also buying them. So it's like you can't have one without the other. How do we get people to, first of all, stop buying these things, but also how do we get the corporations to stop actually making them in the factories in the first place? And some people say that what we need to do is like shame people into stop buying these products. I don't think we need to shame people, but we need to offer them alternatives. And so that's what we're doing with our plastic bag campaign. We're saying, hey, you could bring your own bag to the store instead of relying on a plastic bag. And it's a pretty simple message, and we have found that you need to have a simple message in order for people to really latch onto it. It can't be too complicated. There have been studies about this. There was a study done based on some Paris conference where they had a lot of art stationed around the city in Paris, and they were trying to study which art exhibits were most effective. And what they found was that art that was presented in a very aesthetically pleasing way and also with a hopeful message was more effective than the doom and gloom and you're to blame and like finger wagging at people. That doesn't really work. You have to really just offer people solutions and do it in a way that's presented well and presented in a way that people are going to like. So if you see our billboards, it's basically a collection of environmental activists and advocates and people who are, in the green economy or in the green field, holding their own reusable bags, different types of bags, like book bags, purses, the traditional cloth reusable bags, and telling people you have options when you go to the store. You don't have to just take the plastic bag. And I think we need to expand on that. And like I mentioned earlier, when you see most of the media is saturated with buy, we need to saturate the media with solutions to our problems. We need to actually displace some of the, it's hard to talk about this because I don't know how much we're going to get into the economic angle and the economic system that we're living in and the fact that we are kind of constrained by the economic system. There's certain things we can't do because we're living in a certain kind of system, and it enforces and reinforces certain choices, right? So what we're saying is that within the confines of what we have right now, we're saying that giving people options is what we need to do. We need to tell people there's another way to do things. You don't have to keep doing it this way. There's another option.
I just wanted to jump in really quick and echo that important point too, that that unfortunately, like, some campaigns trying to get us to reduce our waste are relying too heavily on shame and essentially classist types of campaigns. Like, you can't live an aesthetically pleasing zero waste lifestyle if you're managing a household and you have a limited income and you're working 3 different jobs. So I think that goes back to the helpful framing from Ron, that this is a public health issue that needs sustainable, long-term, circular design solutions, not just finger wagging at people. Like, how often do we like being told what to do? Never. So the types of changes and messaging about these changes that I also find the most effective and generative are ones that expose to us that we can do things totally differently, that it is totally within all of our capacity to build a better, more just world. And if we just take out the garbage can and replace that with a plastic bucket, now we're actually way more knowledgeable about the waste that we produce, and we can really make a meaningful change in our own practices that can also empower us to seek further changes.
sets it quite nicely up to what I was going to say. That there are, of course, lots of individual actions that we can take. We can be conscientious consumers, whether it's, we choose not to use that plastic bag, whether we, throw it away or recycle it at the end, whether we choose products. So often now, increasingly, I'm glad to see on my personal sort of pet research is that you see more and more frying pans that say they're PFAS free. PFAS is a pretty toxic environmental contaminant. It's not so toxic on your pan, but when it gets into the landfill eventually and leaches out, that's sort of one of the pathways. So those activities certainly shouldn't be discounted, but the problem is bigger than the individual activities, and so it's in some sense unreasonable to expect those individual activities can counter this much larger problem. And so I would say, as individuals, advocating for change, and especially in my case that's often regulations, so whether it's talking to your politicians, I mean, it's the individual actions matter, but so does your voice. And so making sure that you're informed, which all of you by definition by being here is, so that's fantastic. How can you be informed about these issues, like all the ones we're talking about, and start to advocate for bigger solutions that sort of transcend our individual roles? And to me, that's really sort of one of our most powerful opportunities that we have.
So I'm sitting here thinking about how you could make a clear garbage can or a clear recycling bin out of recycled plastic. I don't know about the feasibility of that, but I like the thought process in that clear container. I think one of the things that we really try to do is convey the why to people, right? And when you ask a lot of people of different socioeconomic backgrounds, like why we recycle, they say the environment. And I'll say, well, what does that mean? And they kind of go, the environment. It's good for the environment, right? So one of the things that I share with people is, you know how you go away for a weekend and you mistakenly leave your trash behind and you come back, especially a weekend in the summertime, and you come back and your house reeks, right? And I explained to them that that's methane gas. Part of what they're smelling is methane, right? Methane aids in the decomposition of the ozone layer, that ozone is O3 as opposed to O2. So we really know that that's like super oxygen, and that the more we deplete that layer, the stronger the sun's rays are. How does that affect a lot of people? Again, in different socioeconomic backgrounds. People of color were not encouraged to wear sunscreen 20, 30 years ago. It just wasn't really a thing. You probably have, if you don't have friends that are people of color, you might have friends that are Sicilian, or friends that are Brazilian, or friends that are from South America. And sunscreen wasn't really a thing that people needed to wear 20, 30 years ago because the sun's rays weren't as strong. And so I try to explain to people the why in a way that they can hear it. Try to explain it in terms of levels of asthma, levels of COPD, and how not taking care of our waste in a responsible way exacerbates those conditions. So I think one thing that we do, or that we as people who are informed have to do, is really convey that why in a really meaningful way to people. Because you'll find that a lot of people will say, it's good for the environment. And then when you ask them what that means, they don't really know what it means, and therefore the impact is lessened. I think another thing that we have to do is on an individual basis, right? Whatever ends up in your hand, you're responsible for. And if that personal responsibility is there, then we will discard these things in a responsible way. It certainly doesn't convey to the realm of water and the way and the research that Dr. Kurz is doing, and the way that there are industrial impacts. But every day we end up with things in our hand that we have a personal responsibility for. We can chuck it, right, over our shoulder and not care. We can put it in the right receptacle, or we can put it in the wrong receptacle. And so I definitely try to convey that level of personal responsibility to people, because it is a level of personal responsibility. When I'm walking down the street and somebody litters, I say, "Oh, you dropped something," right? And they look at me like I'm crazy, because I know that they did it on purpose. And we kind of give each other that look of, like, my look is, "Yeah, I know you did it on purpose." Then their look is, "Oh, I guess you busted me." And then generally they pick it up, right? And so that, again, the personal responsibility has to be there. I think, we do have to make sure that we are recycling right and recycling often. About 40% of the materials that are recyclable get into the recycling bin. So there's another 60% that we have yet to capture. But that means that, it also means that we need people to recycle in the right way. It has to be the right materials, prepared in the right way. And if the right materials aren't what's going in the bin, and I have to give my disclaimer, because otherwise I wouldn't be the recycling director, right? So it's glass, it's cardboard, it's paper, it's metal cans, it's cartons, and it's plastics. And the plastics that we're looking for are 2s, 1s, and 5. Easy to remember. 215 is Philly, right? So 125, 215, however you say it, that's what we want in the recycling bin, and that's all we want in the recycling bin. So those items like hangers or plastic bags or styrofoam or PVC, or those other items that people want to be recyclable, we need to keep those out of the recycling bin. Because again, in order to make it viable economically and viable environmentally, we have to recycle right and recycle often. So.
Great, thank you.
I forget what the question was.
The question was basically, what can we do, and also an opportunity as well to say, like, what is currently happening in your field that you're doing.
Well, I'll talk about some of the work we're doing and what's happening in my field. One of the challenges, I think, in terms of consumer behavior is good waste practices aren't really rewarded. There's no incentive for not littering. There's no incentive, sorry, I have to be closer in. There's no incentive for not littering. There's no incentive for washing that peanut butter out of the jar really thoroughly, right? There's an interesting opportunity, I think, in food waste recovery, which borrowed a term from fashion called upcycling, where you can take food that would be wasted and create new products. And not surprisingly, and probably very dispiritingly, people are really into saving food when it benefits them with a tasty, nutritious, affordable food product, right? In the same way that they're maybe less meticulous about separating their trash that they'll never see again, and for some sort of vague sort of environmental benefit. So, and we see that a lot. Maybe people buy Teslas because they're really concerned about the environment. Probably they buy them because they're super cool and they feel good about themselves. So it benefits them more than it really benefits the environment. It's probably much better for them to buy a used, 10-year-old car and run it into the ground than to go out and buy a brand new Tesla environmentally, right? But in terms of their own feeling, they feel really good. So we've seen actually a lot of success and a lot of opportunity there. I don't know if anyone's seeing upcycled foods as a sort of a new category in the grocery store. There's a few local brands. One is owned by Phil Abundance called Abundantly Good, and they're making cheese and they're making a tomato jam and trying to really bring that into the public consciousness.
That's really great to know. Where could I purchase those Phil Abundance products?
I know they're in DeBruno's, and I think they're in Heirloom as well, the new Heirloom markets. And then there's other products. coming out. So that's I think a good example of what we're talking about the individual versus sort of collective. So it's really hard to get the big food industry to do better sustainability wise, but they're interested now because they see these small brands being successful, and so now, you know, the General Mills and Campbell's of the world are sort of looking at this. So slowly but surely, I think we'll get there. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time in terms of environmental catastrophe, but you know, we're on an academic calendar.
There's the doom and gloom. So I want to take, you know, make one last comment, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A. So the last part I wanted to talk to you guys about was basically, you know, stopping, you know, the planned obsolescence, the instant gratification, basically, that, you know, calls us, you know, as you guys were saying, to make these practices habit, and to have a cultural shift. But I'm also wondering too if anyone could speak to the Green New Deal and to you know, the circular economies as kind of like the larger, broader structural change. Or we've even like talked a little bit about circular design, and I was wondering if anyone could on the panel could speak to, you know, your industry's experience with circular economies and the Green New Deal.
So I'll start. So one business that we have in Philadelphia that is contributing to the circular economy is Remark Glass. They're a small glass company in South Philly. They're in the Bach building, and they take bottles, generally more unique and colorful bottles like a pretty blue or an interesting design, and they they collect these bottles from different bars around the city, and they have arrangements with different restaurants as well, and they take these items and they make them into glassware and other home decor items. And so they're turning over, I want to say, about 1,000 to 1,500 bottles a week that they're putting through their shop. And then it's an artisan business, and so they're supported by the arts community, they're supported by the sustainability community, and I would certainly encourage you know, you all to check them out if you're in the space for glassware. And so there are those smaller businesses that are emerging, and then there are also larger businesses who are not necessarily involved that I can call right now in the circular economy, but that are putting sustainability at the forefront. And so I think, or actually the other one in terms of the circular economy that's been in Philadelphia for a number of years is Newman Paper. Newman Paper is a paper factory on the Delaware River. The city sends about 500 tons of material to them a year, everything that we shred in the police stations and in the firehouses and in the health centers, and everything that's shredded in the city goes to Newman Paper and is recycled. So that's part of the circular economy. Certainly the circular economy around recycling has to grow in order for it to be more sustainable. I do want to get back to one thing though, and that is the idea of the why, right? When we're looking at sustainability, when we're looking at recycling, when we're looking at the different angles or the different aspects of environmental sustainability, we have to keep that why in mind, right? Because that why is so that we can all breathe cleaner air. That why is so that we can, you know, one thing that I tell people in the workshops that I do is you can go to different areas of the world and the sky is literally brown, right? And that's not a temporary condition. It is sitting, you know, in that valley generally. But there are certain areas of the world where people wear a mask every day just to walk outside. And when we're looking at the reason why we recycle and why we want to take care of our environment better is so that we don't have to walk around in a mask every day. It's so that we can go outside, play, breathe clean air, and not come in the house and we're wheezing. I happened to be in Portland a few years back, and they were having fires. They were having a rash of wildfires in the mountains. And generally in that city, natives told me that generally what happens is that when these wildfires are occurring, the winds carry the smoke out to sea. This particular instance, the wildfires winds were blowing into the city. And I happened to go for a run that day that I was out in Portland. And I woke up the next day with what felt like a cold, but it was really just like my lungs had kind of like closed up. And I was having trouble, like not trouble need to go to hospital trouble, but I was having like wheezing and just shortness of breath within the next day of the conference because I did not know the dynamic of the way that the winds were blowing in the city that day based on the fires that were happening, right? And so when we look at the incentive around recycling and the incentive around environmental sustainability, it's so insidious that we don't notice it, right? We walk outside and the sky is blue and we take that for granted. That's what we've been doing all these years, and that's what our lives have been, at least in Philadelphia. But keeping in mind that there are areas of the world that the level of pollution has already made it such that people cannot walk around in what we consider a normal way, is really impactful. And so that's a picture that I generally show in any community meeting that I do, staff meeting that I do, so that we can understand this is happening in other parts of the world today. It's not something that people are kind of imagining is happening, right? That it is really actually happening. And if we're not careful about our environment, it's going to happen here as well. And looking at the fact that there are no I can't even believe that word was about to come out of my mouth. But there are no, there are not these physical walls, right, that are between countries that would keep out smog and pollution anyway, right? There are not these kinds of barriers that could ever go up in the world, nor would we want them to. But, air moves, right? So that brown air that's there can migrate to over here. And if we don't keep what we have in play, and when I say in play, and if we don't keep what we have in good standing and increase the quality of our air, then, that's going to migrate out as well. And so, when we're looking at a lot of this, when we're looking at this whole discussion, right, I really try to make people understand the why, because the why is not as far off as we think it is. Like the doom and gloom is not as far off as we think it is if we're not careful.
Great, thank you. Any last comments or addressing that question?
Well, in Trash Academy, we do upcycle, donated T-shirts into reusable bags, but we don't sell them, so I don't want to say that we're contributing to the economy or we're doing some kind of circular economy. We give them out at events as prizes when people interact with us. But my overall thought on this is that we have to remove the profit motive from our economy. I think that that's part of the problem. We have an economy that is built on growth, constant growth, and that's incompatible with saving our environment or with zero waste goals. So, we just have to be honest about the limits of our current economy and our current economic system and what it's going to take to reach the goals that we want to set for ourselves and to actually, like Kyle said, avoid this worst case scenario that we're facing. We are not going to avoid that scenario with status quo thinking. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you. Absolutely.
It's a great point that relates really closely with food and nutrition, right? It's really bad business to tell people, we're all eating a little bit too much. Let's just buy less, eat less, we'll weigh less, we'll spend less. That's the solution, right? It's all about more. So even in nutrition, diet, right? It's about what can you buy to help you lose weight? What can you do to help you eat healthier? It's all about acquiring, and part of acquiring, then is wasting. The other challenge we're seeing, I think we're not very good in food at the circular economy. A lot of that is regulatory, that the byproducts or co-streams of manufacture can't really be easily used for other purposes, although that's changing. And of course we have to be really careful from a safety perspective about leftovers and and waste. But one of the things we're seeing is as people try to do better, they're not quite thinking through the whole system. So a great example is the really dramatic shift from dairy milk to plant-based milk that we've seen in the last few years. It, in terms of emissions from livestock, in terms of grazing land, arguably it's a much better thing to do. But no one has really thought about the waste of all those plant-based milks, which of course are not milks, they're juices, right? So soy milk, almond milk, the whole water thing is a whole other area. Quinoa milk, cashew milk, right? Any nutritionist would tell you, don't drink so much juice, just eat fruit, right? Because when you drink juice, all you're getting is the sugar and all that good stuff, the fiber and the protein, all of that is staying in the juicer, right? That's exactly what's happening with all these plant-based milks, right? Is you're getting a little bit of protein, a little bit of fiber, all of the starch and sugar, and then in that press is the protein and the fiber and a lot of the mineral content. And that's a new waste product that we really hadn't been ready to deal with. And some of it can be used for animal feed, but it's unstable, it's tricky, it ferments. So we're not there, I would say, in terms of circular economy and full product utilization.
I naively never thought of those as juices. It's a good interesting analogy. Yeah, the circular economy is a tough one when it comes to chemicals. I actually been sitting here racking my brain trying to think of a good example and really can't. Often once you've started to use a chemical, it gets sort of too dispersed, too dilute. We all know dilution is the solution to pollution. It is not, but it's catchy. But the problem is once they're out there, they're hard to recapture and therefore to reuse. And so, yeah, if anyone can think of a good example, raise your hand after this.
I can.
Or can you? You
Yeah.
can, okay.
I'm ready to take that.
You are, okay. But so in our case, it really is, I think, mostly just reducing our use in the first place. And as we've touched on various sort of topics here, I mean, there's lots of different ways and mechanisms for reduction is sort of don't deal with it after it's become a problem, just try and change the behaviors going out. What Kyle said about barriers really struck me because, right, once it's in the environment, when we talk about chemicals, they're hard to reconsolidate and reuse because there are no barriers. They keep moving, they keep transferring through, and you can't build a wall down a river through a watershed. You can't stop the air from flowing, and so yeah, it really is sort of an insidious problem, and not one I see an obvious or clear widespread use of a circular economy in my case.
Thankfully, in fashion, we have some great startup companies and companies basically that are designing circular closed loop systems. So every part of the process cycles and feeds back into it. Basically, the circular economy is changing the take, make, waste linear economy into closed loop. So one such company would be Lenzing. Lenzing is, a company that takes pulp, turns that back down into wood pulp, cycles that back into their closed loop system, and develops their own rayon fiber called lyocell. So that's like one example of, and they're doing that. The problem with this is that it's mostly voluntary, right? So that's where we would come back to, regulations. It should be illegal to design a product that will die and sit in a landfill after 1 year. I'm thinking about earbuds from Apple. It should be illegal to introduce that type of product into our environment now in this day. And then there should also be, regulations incentivizing closed loop manufacturing and production systems. So every company should try and be a closed loop system, a company like Lenzing, essentially, that's thinking about waste and labor and materials all together holistically. On that note, I'd like to turn the questions over to our fabulous audience. Questions for our panelists. Okay, so right here in the blue sweater. Okay, got a microphone coming.
Hi, my question is, how can we push for regulations and like this mentality of reduction of waste and more conscientious manufacturing without being vilified as anti-American or anti-growth and things like that? Yeah. Back to the questions.
What's wrong with being vilified?
I feel like it's counterproductive. I feel like we can't, I'll try to have conversations with my friends about this, and then they immediately shut it down just because I'm like, all right, maybe we don't go shopping this weekend, and so I don't.
Yeah, Ron?
I would say that's what we're trying to address in Trash Academy, the culture. We need a different culture. Like you said, if being an American or being a patriotic American means shop till you drop, there's something wrong with that, right? It's really kind of what the culture is, and that was what was encouraged after 9/11. I don't know, some of you may not be old enough to remember that, but after 9/11, they were telling people to go out and buy as an American thing to prop up our economy and to keep things going. And people were like, okay, we can do that. That's easy, just to go out and buy. But we don't think about what happens to these things when we throw them away, the effects on the environment. And I would say to you, don't be afraid to push back against that. Like you just said, don't be afraid to be vilified, because if you're right, you're right. I don't think that you're wrong for telling your friends, hey, let's maybe not consume as much. We don't have to run out to the store every 3 minutes. There's nothing at all wrong with that. You should not feel bad or un-American for saying, hey, maybe we don't need all of these things, right?
And Greta Thunberg is a great villain right now, so everyone should be just like her.
Yeah, I would also say, just add to that, challenging the way we're doing things, that opens up new opportunities. We've been saying upcycling or the circular economy. It's essentially creating a new economy right now. It may be more expensive, but as that grows, hopefully the whole concept behind its success is that it becomes sustainable. And so, in some sense, by challenging, you're simply saying we need to find a better way, and that may be challenging in the short term, but in the long term, we're opening up new ways, new opportunities, and what could be more American than preserving America?
All right.
Okay. So my question is more directed about water, I guess. And I know they've done a lot of studies that have shown that pharmaceuticals are leaching into waterways, and they're getting into fish now. They've got antidepressants in fish tissue. What are ways that we can, I guess, dispose of the pharmaceutical pills and stuff like that we have that we don't need anymore, but instead of just dumping them down the toilet, what should we do to preserve the environment?
Yeah, excellent question. So like a lot of recycling, there are designated spots you can take pills and pharmaceuticals. Often police stations will accept them. The sort of civil servants have a reason for getting those out of circulation. Also, a lot of pharmacies sometimes have a disposal area, or your doctor's office. And so, yeah, absolutely, getting the word out there of what are the alternatives. I think hopefully most people now know the sense of, okay, I can recycle a can, my tuna can from the house, but yeah, it does get a little more challenging with these, sort of not so well-known contaminants. And so for pharmaceuticals, there definitely are places. Same thing with batteries, glass, even chemical contaminants. There are sort of specialized places. It does take a little bit more effort, but it benefits all of us. And yeah, the impacts are really quite direct because there's a lot of things that we can't clean up once they get out there, and pharmaceuticals are absolutely one of those. They pass right through our water treatment plants and back into our water resources. So yeah, great question, thanks.
Just want to add to that. Many local police stations, most local police stations, they do have a bin inside of the lobby in their district for to discard pharmaceuticals. Also, one thing that we're going to bring online, I'd say within the next 6 months, is a recycling finder. And you just gave me the idea to add pharmaceuticals to that, so that you'll be able to go online, punch in, let's say, paint that you want to get rid of and find out where you can actually take that for it to be reused. Just another resource, though, for those hard to discard items, those items that should not be put down the drain, nor should they be put at the curb, is that we have a series of household hazardous waste events throughout the year that we partner with the 5-county region on. And so if there's not one in Philadelphia this weekend, but there's one in Bucks County, you can go to Bucks County and discard your household hazardous waste safely. Basically, and it's a very quick process because really all you're doing is dropping it off. And then there's a company that we have contracted with, and again, this is the recycling directors in the 5-county region have contracted with this company to then process it safely. And so there are options out there for discarding of these materials. It does take another step, but another step is very well worth it.
Yeah, you just remind me. Internet's a wonderful thing. My township, you're right, you go to their municipal waste and recycling, and they tell you all the things they will take, and then there's a link, and there's maps out there for where you can recycle plastic bags, for example, and they have a map of all the grocery stores and other places that take them, and a whole other list, including pharmaceuticals. So yeah, thanks for that reminder.
Gone to CVS and they have, they won't take them. They gave me some kind of stuff that's supposed to bind them up into some sort of non-toxic solid, but it's not real easy. But my second is pretty simple. Does Philadelphia recycle or not? I mean, I've been told that that stuff gets burned. When I've talked to the trash guys and they say, "Lady, it all goes the same place."
Wow.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
I try really hard, but it's sort of discouraging if you don't think it's happening.
absolutely, that's discouraging. And so I appreciate the question, so thank you. So does Philadelphia recycle? Yes, we do. There were 6 months that we did not send all of the materials that were collected curbside to the recycling facility. Those 6 months were October to March. Into April, we started sending everything back to the traditional materials recovery facility, also known as the MRF. And so the entire city of Philadelphia, anything that is collected curbside is going to a traditional recycling facility. That is a commitment of the mayor of the city of Philadelphia. He's committed to leading us towards zero waste by 2035. And it is a commitment that is not, I don't believe that it is a commitment of political whim. I believe it is a commitment of conviction. And so, yes, the city of Philadelphia recycles all of the material curbside. How does what work? Oh, okay. Good question. And so what I would encourage you all to do is Google Philadelphia MRF on YouTube. If you go to YouTube, there's a video of how things are processed, but I'll give you the quick and dirty. What happens is the city of Philadelphia has a contract with a company. In this case, it's a company called Waste Management that owns the MRF. And the truck goes and dumps the material. A big claw picks up the material, and it puts it into this large hopper, right? And this hopper is like 2 feet high, and it takes everything and it spins it around with these blades such that the materials get re-separated out, because there are vacuums, there are optical sorters, there are magnets, there are different types of scanning devices that then, when these materials come out of the hopper, the glass falls to the bottom because it's the heaviest, and the metal goes out kind of one conveyor belt. The plastic number ones go out one conveyor belt, number twos go out another conveyor belt, number fives go out another conveyor belt, and the cardboard goes out another conveyor belt, the paper goes out another conveyor belt, and at the end of the conveyor belt, there are balers that bale them all into 4x4 cubes, 4 foot by 4 foot cubes, and then they're shipped accordingly.
I'm sorry to jump in here. We have about 5 minutes left, so I'm wondering if we can take 1 or 2 last questions. Whoever has a microphone, go.
Hi, my name is Brian Siegfried, and I run a small recycling business called Rabbit Recycling. So I'm trying to be that intermediate where I get the harder to recycle items to the different places you guys have suggested. Plastic bags, your batteries, your hangers, all that stuff. So you guys do a great job of suggesting what to do with stuff and what we can do, but it's kind of like the compost setup where people put their buckets outside, and we will personally pick apart your stuff and take it to the best spot we can. Everything's not recyclable, but we do what we can with this, and we give you like a report card saying, hey, we took it here, this is us doing it. So I just want to present that idea out there, because I can see that there is this gap between of people wanting something a little bit more delicate, more intimate, and what we have right now, which is, you know, the best we can do on large scale.
All right, thank you for the plug.
Yeah, girl.
One last question. All right. Let's do right here. Right there.
Okay, so I was wondering if you could tell us something about the average person that wouldn't know about alternatives to plastic. Like, for example, in Urban Eatery, our cafeteria, we have paper straws for our smoothies instead of plastic. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Alternatives to plastic. I've read a lot of reports and research on how people try to like go without plastic for a day, and it's really difficult to do. Consider, right, that when I go like this, I'm touching plastic. I mean, really, it is very difficult to avoid. There are, you know, there are paper straws, there are metal straws that I've seen as well. But I'm not really sure, to be honest. Like, I don't know of a lot of alternatives to plastic, to be honest with you. I mean, yes and no. It depends on how they're processed and where they're processed, whether or not they're going to really degrade. And we can say that all plastic bags are biodegradable because they'll break down to little pieces, but the reality is it doesn't like disintegrate. It doesn't go away. Right, the biodegradable bags, they're compostable. I've seen them. In a lot of instances, I know that they gum up the works in different factory settings. Like in the MRF, they gum up the works. So there are alternatives. Sometimes those alternatives are not what they seem, though.
There is some incentive, I'll just add as a geologist, to finding alternatives. Plastic is a petroleum derivative. And we all talk about running out of oil. Well, that's also eventually running out of the source material for plastics. So it's more than just good for the economy or the environment now, but we're going to have to increasingly confront this issue of not even necessarily being able to have the materials to make plastic. So in the long run, it behooves us to start coming up with alternatives for multiple reasons in the short term.
Which this has been a sort of dour panel for good reason, but the upside is, especially at a school like Drexel, there's a lot of opportunities, for innovation and design in this world, and that's a great example. The biodegradable bags. What are the systems? It's great that we have them. Then what are the systems to use them? We see a lot of like greenwashing in food service, where you say, "Oh, I have a compostable cup. I feel so much better about myself." And then you throw it in the landfill, and it's between two sheets of plastic, and it doesn't actually matter, right? But you are seeing innovation there, where you can plant your coffee cup, and there are seeds embedded in the paper, and they'll grow wildflowers, and so there's some effort at least, and certainly some opportunities.
Real quickly, I would just say definitely look for things like metal straws and so forth, but buy less, consume less, bring your own. If you know you're going to go to a place where you're going to have a picnic or something, bring your own utensils so you don't have to use plastic ones. It's just planning ahead a little bit, thinking through things a little bit more, not assuming that we're just going to be handed all these things automatically. I think that's a big part of it.
Thank you so much for a wonderful evening tonight. A round of applause for our panelists.